Greetings YouTube, and welcome to the Undernet. That's right, we are in the Undernet, the vicious, most vile place of all the internet world. And us Undernavies run equally vicious decks, such as this here Evilswarm. Now the Hidden Arsenal 7 has been released, they're finally legal for TCG play after seeing months and months of hype, or rather, after Ophion has been seeing months and months of hype. But does this deck live up to it, or is it just sadly overrated at this time? It's a little bit of both if you ask me, and I'll elaborate more on that as I get further into the video, but I'll just start off with the actual deck list. This is straight up pure Evilswarm. It's not Verzlogia. I just don't feel that's as consistent, and right now the deck is sorely lacking in consistency, at least until we get Kirkion. So, the monsters, triple copies of Heliotrope, 1950 Vanilla Beater, that's summonable through Rescue Rabbit, and it's an Evilswarm. Not much else to say about that. Flavor text is amusing. Then 3 copies of Caster. You are double summon guy. Should note that Veiler will not stop this. If they Veiler it, it's already too late. It's considered to be a condition or something along those lines. It's kind of weird really, but Skill Drain will prevent him from being able to double summon, but just FYI, if you're holding a Veiler against this deck, don't use it on this. But this is how one of the more common ways you will be making your Ophions is summoning this guy and summoning something else in the hand and going there. And he's a warrior, so you can tutor it out with Rhoda. Then you've got 3 copies of Evilswarm Thunderbird, which is probably the best standalone card in the entire deck at this time. Card effect activates, fly away, come back at 1950. That's rather helpful, and allows you to play a grind game with him by just beating around back row. They don't really want to prison it or force it unless they have those 2 cards in conjunction. So that's rather helpful. And 3 copies of Mandragora. If your opponent has more monsters than you do, you can special summon it for free. So it's rather helpful if they go like a turn play where they got 2 monsters on board. You can drop both Mandragoras without burning your normal summon and going to Ophion. This ability is nice, and it's... Then for the non-guys, we got 2 copies of Rabbit. Self-explanatory. Still running the 2 copies because I want to see it as soon as I can, even if I have only 1 target for it. And lastly, 2 copies of Card D, which is going to make this deck not so easy to build for some people. I know a lot of people were looking into building Evilswarm as a cheaper alternative to Elemental Dragons, and cards just suddenly make it like, oh, I guess I can't build it the good way. Granted, once Kirkion comes out, Card D is unnecessary, but for the time being, yeah, I would not run this deck without card. Just being able to dig into your Evilswarms, your spells, traps, and whatnot. And there may be those times where you can just sit on an Ophion and summon this, pop it off, draw 2, and then on the next turn, you can do more stuff. Then for the spells and traps, I have 3 copies of Infestation Pandemic. The theme Forbidden Lance that's searchable through Ophion, protects all your guys from spells and traps until the end phase of the turn. This is one of the reasons why the deck is extremely difficult to play against, is it's rather resistant to spell and trap based monster removal. Meaning you have to kind of resort to monster effects to clear the play around them, really. And yeah, this just makes cards like Darkhold and Torrential Tribute and Mirror Force largely ineffective against the deck. And then for the things that Pandemic cannot stop, i.e. monster-based destruction effects, you've got Forbidden Dress, of which I might take it up to 3. It's either 3 of this or 3 MST to get around back row even more so, but about Dress. This card is largely used to protect Ophion from destruction effects like Raikou, Snowman Eater, Atlantean Heavy Infantry, so on and so on, but what we have to remember is you cannot use this in response to an infantry that's being summoned off that's being pitched from a pike that's been summoned off a Linde during the damage step, because that's sub-step 7 and this can only be used up to sub-step 4. So ideally what would you be doing is you attack a face down, you see it's a Linde, you have to think to yourself, what now? Well, you have to dress the Ophion right then and there before Linde dies and goes to the graveyard, because her effect activates at a later point in the damage step in which this cannot be used. Just FYI. But yeah, it's useful. It allows Ophion to survive against monster-based destruction effects and stay at 1950 attack, which is still enough to beat over certain monsters, whereas a Forbidden Lance would put Ophion even lower than that and allow Dragoons to run it over. Yes, it would. He'd be at 1750, which would be just enough for Dragoons to kill it. And then MST, again, this is a deck that wants to get through back row and get its creatures to hit the field safely. MST clears the back row, that could be a problem. This is also a card that could take up to 3. And for the spells, Dark Hole, Heavy Storm, Monster Reborn, Rhoda. All self-explanatory. Now for the traps, of which I run many, but never seem to open with all that frequently. It's not really fun having to make an Xyz play and not have stuff to protect it. It's, yeah, infuriating, really, but Yu-Gi-Oh's. Anyway, 2 copies of Bottomless Trap Hole, fairly good card. 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill. Not Fiendish Chain, simply as here, Abyss Guileless is kind of a card, and you want to be able to negate that during your own turn as well. So this guy's affecting the graveyard, rather useful. And the Breakthrough Skill cannot be MST to stop it from negating stuff. Plus, Ophion's 2550 makes him bigger than most monsters in the game. The one guy who can reliably beat it over, Gemini Pearl, has no effect, so you can't Fiendish Chain it to begin with. So, ultimately, this card's rather useful. I don't know if I'd ever put a third one in. I don't have a third one, so that's why I'm only running the 2. Then for other stuff, 2 copies of Prison, 2 copies of Force, 2 copies of Torrential Tribute, 2 copies of the 2 Solemns you're allowed to play, and then what I decided I'd try out over a third Dress or third MST was a single copy of Xyz Reborn. Overall, I found this card to be rather subpar. Every time that Xyz Reborn was being used, it was because my Ophion was killed through a destruction effect that Dress would have saved it from to begin with. But there are those times where I could go standby phase during my opponent's turn, flip up the Xyz Reborn, summon the Ophion with a material, and now they're like, well, fuck, you douchebag. Like, Ophion's a gigantic troll. And so, yeah, I can see this being more useful when the deck goes into a more viral style post-Tachyon, but right now, Xyz Reborn, it's kind of a gimmicky card. I just would run straight up more generic stuff. And that is it for the main board. Now let's go into the extra deck, of which I've got 3 copies of Evilswarm Ophion. Let's pretend this is an Ophion. After all, it's what Ophion is. So we'll move him over here. But yeah, Ophion. This is the biggest reason why the deck is so fearful right now is, well, Ophion, his effect of your opponent nobody being able to summon level 5 and higher monsters while he has materials. It does hurt a lot of decks. It doesn't guarantee you the win against Mermail, though. They have ways to get around this thing. They won't always hit those ways, but you won't always hit the plethora of spells and traps here that I've got to protect Ophion. I'm not always going to have these things, and so it's possible for Mermails, again, to pop this guy with infantry. They're starting to main deck Mermail Abyss, dying to help get around it. Bahamut Shark can beat it over. Tempo can knock off his additional material, because you're going to make Ophion, you're going to detach to search, and then on their turn they can do stuff. I don't know how the play is supposed to go exactly, but ideally they're supposed to summon Abyss dying from the deck, who then grabs a Linde from the deck, and then main phase 2 you go into a Tempo and then knock off on Ophion's material. If you try and make another Ophion, they can just knock off the material during your turn, and Tempo will be too big for him to get over. So you kind of have to watch out for Tempo against that deck. They're starting to play that more now. And honestly, against Mermail, I'm beginning to wonder if going turn 1 Ophion really is ideal. And perhaps rather, if my back row allows me to, I should go into a fast Abyss Dweller first and slow Exceed into another Ophion and kind of work with that, because Ophion plus Dweller would be a much better field to have against him than Ophion and then another Ophion or another Bahamut. Like, I don't know, there's several ways to go about handling the Mermail matchup, but yeah, it's simply not as going to be auto win as you think it is game 1. Games 2 and 3 you can side in Macro and Soul Drain, but just be wary of the shit that they'll be siding in for you too. And then for the remaining monsters, of course, we've got 2 copies of Evilswarm Bahamut. Pretty solid card. I haven't really used them as much as I'd want to, but the situations for him just have not arisen, but he is good. He's really great in the mirror match. They go for the turn 1 Ophion. You go for a turn 1 Bahamut instead, and you take their Ophion, and you just tank on it. Like, you take their Ophion and then search out a Pandemic. It's pretty good stuff. Granted, his effect only works on face-ups, and you have to discard an Evilswarm, but that's alright. It's still a snatch steal on legs to some degree. And then 1 copy of Evilswarm Ouroboros. Just imagine it, folks, because I don't have one yet. Ouroboros, you will sometimes go into. There are times where a Shockmaster is not going to be effective like they are sitting on like a gigantic 3,000 beater or something, and you just want to get that thing out of the way. Well, Ouroboros can bounce any card out of the way. You can knock a card out of their hand, or you can remove a card from the graveyard. Ouroboros is not as strong as this, obviously, but it's still a good one-up in the deck. And then for the generics, 1 copy Diamond Direwolf. This is supposed to be a Daigusta Emerald, but I just don't have one. Gonna have to work on that before he goes up in price. Gemnite Pearl, extremely useful for getting over the guys that Ophion cannot. That 2600 attack beats over opposing Ophions, and it bumps heads with Bahamut Shark, etc., etc., etc. Of course, Ouroboros also beats over Bahamut Shark, but again, that requires 3 monsters, this requires 2. Shockmaster, there are times though that where this is going to be helpful. And then you've got Utopia. This is actually really good paired up with Ophion because they can't beat over him, and they'll have to again rely specifically on destruction effects. Black Ship of Corn, Dweller, Cowboy, and Maestro. Honestly, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to have to do this at some point anyway, that is, get another one of these, but I'm honestly, yeah, thinking of taking the Dweller count in this extra deck up to 2, much like how Fire Fist can make 2 Abyss Dwellers extremely often. I should probably consider doing the same in here. And, yeah, that's it for the extra. And that's pretty much it for the deck. I hope you guys enjoyed this trip to the internet, because I assure you it will not be the last. This is probably going to be one of my 3 most played decks for the duration of the format, the other ones being Dragoonity, because I only need 2 to 3 Tempests to build that, and then, if I can afford it, Disaster Dragon / Elemental Dragon. But there's only so much I'm willing to spend in regards to that deck in general. But yeah, overall, this is a pretty decent start, but I know it can be better. I know it's not that much different from what's already been posted online, so at least I know I've got a good idea of what I'm trying to do. It's just, yeah, again, the deck is just not as consistent as people would like it to be, and I'll be really surprised if more than 2 manage to top YCS New Jersey, at least depending on the event. Like, I think maybe 1 will get to top 16, 2 tops, but it's probably not going to win it. The other top decks, Fire Fist, Mermail, and even Map Rabbit to extend, are much more consistent. And barring someone being extremely lucky and godly with their hands, consistency is what ultimately gets you somewhere. That all being said, thank you guys for watching. This is Obelisk TGS, jacking out.